Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cultivating Ideas. My name is Sean Watkins, and I serve as Associate Dean for Lifelong Learning. Excited to have you back for another edition and another lecture by one of our professors. Very excited to have Patricia Bonilla with us this afternoon. Reverend Patricia Bonilla is the instructor in Christian education here at Austin Seminary and has served in several roles with the Hispanic Youth Leadership Academy, currently as the National Program Director. He's a native of Illinois and is an ordained United Methodist deacon and has served in churches throughout Illinois since 2005, primarily in the area of Christian education and youth and family ministries. Her topic today, which is very helpful and impactful and quite relevant, trauma-informed faith formation and the importance of being trauma-informed religious leaders to help congregations enact hope-filled practices for healing and for transformation. She's in the process of writing her dissertation as we speak, and so probably the next time that she speaks at Cultivating Ideas, she will be Dr. Patricia Bonilla. So super excited for her. That being said, we'll turn it over to you. Have a wonderful time.
Thank you so much, Sean. I am very grateful to be a part of this series and glad to be invited to speak on this topic that has been something that I have recently been interested in. So I come to the study of trauma informed ministry really as an educator. So I'll be looking at how education connects with trauma studies. I'm interested to hear from you all what brought you to this space and why you're interested in a trauma-informed ministry practice. So maybe you could drop that in the chat, and we could start that way as I get my slides together so we can start a conversation. Okay, so I wanted to start first with a breathing exercise. Um, This is something that I use in my classes. It's called like square breathing or box breathing. Um, and so I'm going to go ahead and play the video, but it's really trying to connect with your body. And the method is that you breathe out. So you inhale and you exhale at the same pace. So the video will help us kind of keep pace with our breathing. Let's take one more breath together. So one of the important things that trauma informed ministry raises is the need to reconnect people with their bodies, because trauma often disconnects us from our bodies. So creating spaces where we take the time to do that, to be present in our bodies. I wanted to also set the agenda for you all, so that you know where we're going. So I'm using um, Imad May's article on Our Brains, Emotions, and Learning, 8 Principles of Trauma-Informed Teaching. I'm going to begin with talking about trauma-informed pedagogies. Then I'm going to go into the question of what is trauma, defining trauma. And I'm going to use some of the work that Dr. Basil Vanderkalk has published in his book. The book keeps the score: Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And then I'm going to move into thinking about trauma theologically. So what is trauma-sensitive theology? And I'm going to be using the work of Jennifer Baldwin from her book, Trauma-Sensitive Theology, Thinking Theologically in the Era of Trauma. And then we're going to work on developing trauma-informed practices together in community. So that's my agenda for us today. And so I wanted to start with this image, because I'm going to be using an educational framework and bringing into dialogue trauma studies and faith formation. And so I disclose that I'm not a clinician or a therapist. And so engaging this topic from an educational perspective is where I intersect with these studies. Um, and so most religious educators are not, trained in psychology, but we do engage some of the theories of psychology that informs education. So this webinar highlights trauma-informed pedagogies and offers strategies to help congregations um, and those who are in ministry to implement trauma-informed practices in their faith communities. In his book entitled Descartes' Error, neurologist Antonio Damasio argues that humans do not make decisions by relying exclusively on the rational or reason-oriented part of their brain. The brain is composed of 86 million neurons, which is comparable to the number of stars in the Milky Way. Um, Neurons receive, process, and transmit or communicate information to other neurons. And that connection that is made is called a synapse. So every thought, emotion, and action that we engage in is enacted through these connections between neurons. And so an important thing that Maya Imad addresses in her article on brains, emotions, and learning, she says that reminds us that there are three distinct regions that the brain is made up of, and they are divided into a hierarchy. There's the brainstem, which this is our non-rational brain, and it's concerned with our survival state. It asks questions like, am I safe? Am I breathing? And then the second system is the limbic system, and this is our irrational brain, which is concerned with social processing and our emotional state. And it asks questions like, am I loved and do I matter? And the neurocortex is our rational brain, which is concerned with our reflective state. So asking questions like, what can I learn from this experience? And I engaged the concern of trauma in ministry as an educator. And this is why understanding how the brain works is important for understanding how we learn. There is a misconception often in education that our emotions are irrational and unruly, and they hinder our learning. And so recent studies indicate that actually emotions and memory play a vital role in learning. And so I think that this is a significant consideration in the area of religious education and faith formation, because learning and faith formation cannot happen in the absence of emotions. And so we know that our whole system has a way of engaging various emotions. So emotions are a reaction of the body to stimulus. So when we perceive threat, for example, we feel fear. And our body goes into gear. Our heart rate begins to increase. And so we have the first image, which is right. We're familiar with this reaction that our body has. We fight, we take flight, or we freeze. Um, but more recent studies now show that there's actually a fourth mode that we can go into, and that is fawn. So fawn is about keeping the threat appeased when there is no other option. So this response is, for example, a constant superficial engagement or a performative engagement with the threat. And so I want to take a moment to read some of the things that you've left in the chat. I had asked, what brings you to this space, and why are you interested in trauma-informed practices as leaders? And some of the responses are the UMC just voted to end the ban on gay clergy, and this has been stressful for us in the United Methodist Churches. Yes, I agree. There's been a heightened level of uncertainty, and so very, very stressful. Rachel says, my background is in education, where I worked with kids that needed trauma-informed education. I worked as a leader with social emotional learning. Now in the churches, with the things our kids are facing in the world, I see the same need in Christian formation. And so there's a across the lifespan. This is very, very true. So I'd love to hear from you on how we can make that connection. My church has a lot of immigrants who have been recently arrived from Texas, and we know that journey can be very, very traumatic. Um, and so thank you for putting all this in the chat. I'm an English professor with Austin Community College and have completed the CIM at APTS. My students, Gen Z, have experienced trauma in a variety of ways and come from many faith backgrounds, including none. Because I teach writing, I am often also teaching being human. Yes. Thank you for putting all that in the chat. I think there's some very important connections across disciplines that we can engage a little bit later in the presentation. But I really appreciate you all sharing what brought you to this workshop. So just to share, here's an image that shows the trauma response, right? Flight is we run away. In this example, there's a bear, right? The threat is a bear, so we remove ourselves from the situation. We fight the bear verbally, or when we're verbally or physically attacked, it's a way we fight, right? Freeze, we play dead. And then fawn is we keep the bear happy when there's no other option, right? We do whatever it takes to avoid or diffuse danger. And so The amygdala in these situations receives the initial input from the exterior world and does a cost-benefit analysis to determine whether it is safe to engage the rational part, or if the amygdala senses that there's a threat, it will engage the irrational part of the brain, sending information to the brainstem to activate the fight-flight response, like we saw. Um, and so when the brain senses pressure from a particular situation, or if it perceives a constant threat like COVID, economic insecurity, threat of violence, constant surveillance, this causes a disconnect or a disharmony between our rational and irrational states. And so disrupting this is a disruption to the balance between emotions and thinking, and it prevents us from thinking rationally, really. Um, and so trauma studies or trauma-informed lens, what it offers is it's about providing an environment that can help relax the brain to begin to shift back to homeostasis. And so homeostasis is our body's ability to maintain a stable internal environment in the face of changing external conditions. Uh, so what we do in trauma-informed care or trauma-informed ministry is try to create an environment where homeostasis can happen. So there's a harmony between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system that balances and creates a balance between the rational and emotional brain. Let me go back real quick. One of the things that the author writes in this article is that we cannot give what we do not have. Ministry leaders need to also recognize not only trauma in their congregations, but also in themselves. So if we are experiencing trauma and are not aware of it, we bring that to our ministry. And then our faith communities pick up on it as well. And so we need to find ways to regulate our own emotions, right? Our own nervous system, to find ways to engage with our own trauma, because we cannot give what we do not have. And that is, we cannot give a sense of safety when we ourselves do not feel that sense of safety. These are the 8 principles that the author discusses. Maya Iman, in her article, she writes, these are the 8 principles of a trauma-informed pedagogy. And so the first one is work to ensure your faith community's emotional, cognitive, physical, and interpersonal safety. So think about your faith community and where you have signs of, what your safety policies are. For example, I've worked with children in the church. I've worked with youth groups, vulnerable adults, and in the Methodist Church we have policies on safe sanctuary. And I'm always surprised that not more churches do this, but posting what those policies are so that people are aware that there is a policy in place, so that you give off a sense that there's that you're creating a safe space. So reminding congregations that we will not be that we operate within these safe sanctuary models. Another thing that I find interesting of trauma studies is that offering people choice and letting people know that they have choice. So think about, like, in your sanctuaries, if you have activities for children to do, but are there also activities for adults who might need to refocus at times? Are there doodling pads? Uh, is there a culture of letting people get up and leave the sanctuary if they have to, and letting them know that those actions, if they need to get up and leave, maybe there's a difficult topic that is being engaged, or a triggering event, that their actions are not being negatively interpreted or judged by others, right? That they are able to freely get up, take a moment, and come back when they feel ready to engage again. So the goal of addressing safe space guidelines is to be able to set our intentions, so that we create a safe space, and we can be more present and create spaces of learning and thriving for all. And so being intentional, letting people know that this is our culture, right? That this is how we create a safe space. Even though there's no one safe space for all, practices like this can help us create safer spaces or move us in that direction. So what does safety look like for your community, right? Asking them, include your congregation in the conversation of creating safe spaces. The second principle is to foster trustworthiness and transparency through connection and communication among members. And so this is, again, to be to point to being transparent, fostering trust, and it helps increase predictability, which in turn helps mitigate the impact of ongoing uncertainty. So I'm thinking about the various maybe leadership processes that our churches have, right? How are we creating a new task force? Being transparent about how those processes work so that our congregations feel a sense of trust. Um, the third point is intentionally facilitating peer support and mutual self-help in your lessons, in your sermons. So again, this is from an educational perspective, but like, how do we facilitate peer support, mutual help within the life of the church or faith community? And so asking your congregation what matters to them. Um, at the heart of trauma is this idea that relationships have been broken. And so how can the church be a place of creating meaningful relationships and creating spaces for healing from trauma? And this involves fostering healing and meaningful relationships. So think about just the hospitality ministry of the church, right? How are we facilitating peer support, mutual help, being intentional with this? And the fourth principle is to promote collaboration and mutuality for sharing power and decision making in your congregation. So again, going back to all the points I have already made, that involving your congregation in the process, being transparent, creating a sense of trust that they know what the process is, asking your congregation what matters to them. And then the fifth point is empower voice and choice by identifying and helping build on student strengths. So think about how this would translate into like a church community. How do we create empowering helping people having an empowering voice. So from an educational perspective, right, students who have experienced or are experiencing traumatic stress also experience losing their sense of control and agency. This is true of, any congregant, right? Trauma creates a loss of control, a loss of agency. So empowering students or empowering your congregation to have a voice and to advocate for themselves is an important part of being a trauma informed and creating spaces for healing. A part of self-advocacy is self-awareness and self-acceptance. So we can help validate and normalize people's concerns by talking with them about their fears, about their stress, their anxiety, and trauma. And I think about how many churches actually avoid these conversations. They don't want to stir the waters. This is uh, necessary for creating a trauma-informed ministry, is to engage the topic rather than brushing it under the rug. The sixth principle is empowering your students to self-regulate by teaching them about the biology of learning. So this is true for your congregation. If you create an educational space where you talk about how trauma affects the body, and then people are aware of, they can make the connection. Oh, I've been feeling very unfocused, and now I know that it's not a problem, there's something wrong with me, but I'm experiencing some kind of a response to trauma. So when we help people understand the relationship between stress, emotions, and cognition, we enable them to have self-compassion when they struggle to connect with their they struggle to connect in their daily life. So the seventh principle the author talks about is impart to your students the importance of having a sense of purpose. So often with trauma, we lose our sense of purpose. And so what would it look like to help your congregants reconnect with their purpose? Maybe helping them envision short-term purposes rather than when they've lost a connection to maybe their long-term life plan, right? What does it look like to be a congregation that helps people do that? And then the eighth principle is paying attention to cultural, historical, and gender issues. And I think this is really important. Each individual experiences trauma differently. So we cannot make assumptions about how people are experiencing their trauma, right? And we also need to be mindful about how racialized communities may experience trauma differently. This is true also of how intergenerational trauma is experienced. And so being mindful of these things as you're thinking about the various ways that you can implement trauma-informed educational practices, but also how that translates into ministry practices. Yeah. So what are some ways that you can integrate these pedagogical priorities in your ministry? Think about that. Any
I don't mind
thoughts?
going first and kind of modeling, I think, kind of communication things. I think for me, number 8 is always most impactful, paying attention to the cultural, historical, and gender issues. Prior to stepping into my role here at Austin Seminary, I spent the last 20 years doing diversity, equity, and inclusion training with organizations really around the country. And typically, when I have been in spaces that are multi-ethnic and multicultural, meaning that white people are not the dominant modality, the dominant group that's present, people of color tend to be very apprehensive because they assume that I'm going to offer a training that either re-traumatizes them or kind of minimizes the diversity that's in the room. The reverse is also true. If it's a predominantly white organization and I'm stepping into diversity training, there's an automatic assumption that I am going to say things that are only anti-white or that are racist towards white people. And so in both situations and contexts, I think people have experienced so many types of trainings that do not take into account the trauma or the culture or the gender or the location of people. And so I think even naming that reality of saying people are coming with their own trauma, whether that's professional trauma, personal, cultural, geographic, historical, all of those things is just very seminal. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah. Anybody else? Thank you for sharing. Okay. We
I'm
use
Cheryl.
yeah.
Can you, um, I'm the comment about the United Methodist Church. It was just today that the conference, the Methodist conference voted, or yesterday voted to end the ban on gay clergy. And that, the conservative churches have left about 20% or more in Texas. The Methodist churches have left the United Methodist Church. And I elected to stay United Methodist, but it dawned on me when I was talking to the people in my old church, the conservative church, that they are feeling the stress and the pain just as much as the people who left. And that was a new thought for me. I thought that the people who were, who believed in the conservatives were against gay clergy, and the progressives were thought gay clergy, the rules against gay clergy should be lifted. But it didn't really matter which side you were on. You still felt the pain of your church members.
Yes, there's a lot. Thank
Yeah,
you for sharing. There's a lot there
yeah,
in that decision, right? And
well,
just
yeah,
the many years of the uncertainty and the hurt, right? The hurt that
right,
was inflicted on um both those who were excluded and those who felt that um that the church was changing, and that was painful for them, right?
right,
And
right.
so there's a lot there, but also just the loss of relationships,
Yes,
the loss of community can be very traumatic. And so thank you for engaging that topic. Yes.
thank you.
I wanted to let me share again my presentation because I wanted to move on to defining what trauma is. And I'm going to be using the work of, uh, his name is Basil van der Kolk, and he wrote this book, The Body Keeps the Score. Um, and he talks about the pervasiveness of trauma in our society. He says it's so widespread. It occurs in alarmingly high numbers everywhere in urban and rural settings, suburban settings. It happens. There's not one place where it doesn't happen. It happens in developing nations, in developed nations. It happens in families, in neighborhoods, in every single country around the world. In his book, The Body Keeps the Score, he argues, or he cites the statistical information derived from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which finds that 1 in 5 Americans is molested as a child. 1 in 4 is beaten by a parent. And this isn't a spanking or this is these are this is physical violence um, that 1 in 4 Americans experience. This is only one of many experiences of trauma that van der Kolk highlights. And so I'm going to bring up a another document that I'd like to share. And this is the Trauma Informed Care Implementation Resource Center. This is how they define trauma. Trauma is a pervasive problem. It results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. And some examples that they offer of trauma that could cause trauma are physical, sexual, emotional abuse, childhood neglect, living with a family member with mental health or substance use disorder, sudden unexpected separation from a loved one. Poverty can be a cause for trauma, racism and discrimination, as Sean pointed out. Violence in the community, war, terrorism. And I would add that, also the violence that we see in the media, in our social feeds, just knowing and watching the violence, around the world, even if we're not, we're not in a war-torn country, uh, uh, it affects us as well, to constantly be seeing that, right? And so trauma is much more pervasive than we think. Although trauma can occur at any age, it is particularly debilitating long-term for children who experience trauma, because their brains are developing. And so when a child experiences trauma, it is referred to as an adverse childhood experience. And so this, I thought, was just a staggering number. 62% of US adults experience at least one adverse childhood experience in their lifetime. And 25% of US adults will experience 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. So it is likely that people in our congregation will have experienced trauma, right? And I think that so many of our faith communities are not engaging the topic, right? And so just beginning the conversation of how can we learn about trauma? How can we engage the topic? I think is the first step in becoming trauma-informed religious leaders. So let me share just a few more slides so that we can have a conversation. One of the things that helps in the healing process, and we've seen it in many, many studies, is reconnecting with our bodies. And so play is an important part of the healing process in trauma. Play or body attunement exercises. One of the I won't show the video because we won't have time, but one organization that I share with my class is Life is Good Playmakers. And what they share is how to engage children, especially in reconnecting with their bodies. So they play this game, it's body shakes, but it's in a very intentional way. So inviting the children to offer up how they want to shake their body. Also asking them how they're feeling about their reconnecting with their bodies. Inviting them to model how they want to reconnect with their bodies. And so again, play is an important part of reconnecting with our bodies as a trauma healing practice. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how do we become how do we engage a trauma sensitive theology? In her book, Jennifer Baldwin asks this question: how do we begin to think about trauma theologically, right? We do not deny that the church has been a place of harm, and places of higher learning have also been a place of harm, but they can also be places of healing and support. So how do we learn to communicate and interpret trauma? How do we reduce the stigma of trauma in our faith communities? And in order to do that, we need to make use of the best knowledge of our time in multiple disciplines: psychology, philosophy, sociology, politics, and education, without abandoning the narratives, she says, of our faith that support our meaning making and our identity. So she identifies a framework of trauma-sensitive theology that sets forth 4 primary commitments. And the 4 are on the screen. I'll go through each one real briefly. She talks about the priority of body experience. So as I've said, trauma is experienced in the body. Most of our theological traditions, especially after the Enlightenment, place an emphasis on human rationality at the expense of our embodied spiritual practices. And often the body has been seen as sinful, especially the female body. So how do we restore and honor the physical body in and thinking theologically about engaging trauma, right? How do we honor the physical body? Uh, and talk about the body as not in a sinful way. The second point is full acceptance of trauma narratives. So what is the role of religious care and mental health professionals? And she argues that it's not to adjudicate the facts of trauma. It's to advocate for safety, to support and to facilitate the repair of traumatic injury, and to promote recovery and resiliency. These aims can only happen if we accept narratives of traumatic experience as they are understood by the survivors of trauma. Now, I remember offering a workshop to a group of pastors a few years ago, and somebody shared their experience of trauma, and right away, the response by one of the pastors was, "Did that really happen? Did it really happen like that?" And so questioning people's experience of trauma is so hurtful. And so as you know, religious leaders, it is not our job to adjudicate if this experience is real or not, but to fully accept the narrative, the trauma narrative of people who have survived trauma. And the third point that she makes, or the third priority, is the natural givens of human psychological multiplicity. So we have a multiplicity of thought, of emotion, of social roles. Survivors utilize a multiplicity of fragmented forms of resiliency. So you may see somebody who has experienced trauma, and you may think that person doesn't seem like they have been through trauma, but we use all a variety of ways to hold ourselves together in various different spaces. And so we cannot question how survivors of trauma have pieced themselves together to be resilient. The fourth point is that faith in the robust resiliency of trauma survivors, right? This is so important, that survivors do not just identify as broken, shattered, and ruined, that there is so much more to their story. And so story linking is one thing that we use in religious education, and thinking about how we can connect story linking with the biblical narratives of resiliency as a source of strength and healing for people who have experienced trauma. So Baldwin argues that the church has the potential to be a place that helps to cultivate practices of resiliency and to create spaces of restoration after trauma is experienced. what resonates with you about the 4 commitments or priorities in a trauma-sensitive theology? I'm going to pause there. What resonates with you? Any questions?
I think what resonates with me is, I believe it was the second one, the full acceptance of the trauma,
Yes.
because we've not experienced what that person has experienced. Even if we have experienced something similar, we're still individual, unique creations. And each one of us responds to a situation in our own unique way. And I like what you said. I mean, it is not our place to validate or invalidate, but it's our place to provide comfort and a safe place for
Yes.
the person to express their pain.
Yes. Thank you, Rick. Exactly. Any other thoughts? Yes, Elizabeth.
Yes, so the second one also resonated with me, and I was thinking about how even with just the loss of a loved one, just family member passes away, our society is so I've came across a quote recently, mourning avoidant, that we tend to sort of, our society tends to limit other people's time for mourning and grieving by either non-response or a response that sort of implies that it's time to move on, move past. And I think that that may also be a reason for, that contributes to this idea of not accepting someone's trauma narrative. It's like, I think that's essentially where it starts. It starts from this already sort of prescriptive way of grieving.
Yeah.
I don't know, just a thought.
And thinking about how we engage, healing practices, right? We know that we cannot tell people to snap out of, trauma, snap out of grief. It's not a rational, there's no rational steps, right? And so, the trauma studies tell us that what people need is a way to reconnect with their bodies, because grief disconnects us, right? Trauma disconnects us. And the Christian tradition has so many spiritual practices that are embodied practices, right? And we tend to forget them, right? We want to go straight to telling people, here are the rational steps for moving from pain to health, from moving from sorrow to joy, and there's no steps, right? But we can enact places where we can reconnect with community, where we can reconnect with our bodies, where we can reconnect with our emotions, right? Think about all of the prayer meditations, right? And different ways that we can enact those practices in the church. So we have just a few more minutes. Let me do one last slide here. So strategies for creating a trauma-informed ministry. Some folks talk about having creating a safe sanctuary policy, creating a safe space, right? Having it clearly defined, having all of the leadership in the church know what the policy is. The safe sanctuary policy can also include an explanation about why safe environments are crucial for everyone, but especially persons who are healing from traumatic experiences. It also helps reduce stigma associated with trauma, and it's an educational a way of teaching people about the importance of being trauma informed. Fostering a sense of connection, helping people reestablish social networks. We know that people who have experienced trauma will go into withdrawal, right? They withdraw themselves from their social networks. They feel a sense of disconnection. They don't want to be present, and so finding ways to help slowly ease them into reestablishing those social connections. Church and community opportunities for remembrance, reflection, and lament. Consider offering memorial services, prayer vigils, offering any other forms of gathering. This can help communities process the impact of trauma and begin to heal together. I'm thinking about the students, right, that have been protesting on university campuses, and how they've enacted this connection with their faith, and so many of them have created spaces to pray together, and have created spaces to pray together from various traditions, learning from each other. How those spaces are created. So that's the one thing that comes to mind. Comfort can also be brought through creative expressions such as art installations, murals, music, poetry, dance, and movement. This comes from a book that I use in one of my classes, From Lament to Advocacy. That's the title of the book. And then developing sermons and teaching series that incorporate coping practices. Finally, refer and resource externally to trusted community resources. Trauma-informed churches know the limit and scope of the spiritual and emotional care services that they can provide, especially when someone needs specialized professional trauma clinical care. Knowing who to refer them out to, and then prioritizing self-care. Burnout is so common in the helping professions. So knowing that where your limits are and when you need to take a step back and care for yourself, because we cannot offer what we do not have. So that's yes, that's my presentation. Any thoughts from the group here? Yes, Cheryl.
The protests over the Palestinian and Israel issue has kicked up kind of Vietnam protest war protest trauma in me. I did find myself thinking about the days that my friends and I participated in Vietnam War protests, and it's kind of brings it back, So I'm not sure where I'm going with that thought.
Yeah. Well, memory is an important component of trauma. So just like our emotions are connected to trauma. Trauma is not experienced just now in the present, right? Trauma that can be triggered, and what you have experienced in the past, you're living it again, and it's not just a memory. I mean, you live it in your body because you've experienced that trauma in your body, and so being mindful of that it is a full embodied experience, and so what you need, right, knowing what you need to take care of yourself is important.
It's a wonderful place for us to be able to pause. And yeah, the body does indeed keep score. And there are many things that are happening in our society right now that our bodies are reminding us of traumas from the past. And so, Reverend, soon to be Dr. Patricia Bonilla, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and an excellent addition to Cultivating Ideas. Super grateful for your voice and the wisdom and insight that you've given. to us. Thank you immensely. And so next week, join us as Dr. Gregory Cuellar, who serves as Associate Professor of the Old Testament, will be sharing insights on resacralizing the other at the U.S.-Mexico border. So once again, a very relevant topic for us. So thank you all so much for attending Cultivating Ideas, and hope you have a fantastic day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.